My name is Arif Ansari. I live here in Calgary, and I grew up here. Spent most of my life in this lovely city. I guess I approached the Calgary Cassette Preservation Archive as just a way of preserving, because it's in the title, just a lot of the music that's in Calgary, that's being made in Calgary. A lot of that stuff is very ephemeral. It doesn't last long. Doesn't stick around. And especially with the cassette tape, it's such a weird thing, which cassette tapes were cheap to produce and they just got discarded very easily. And so a lot of them got lost to the time. I guess part of how I learned how to archive stuff is tied to probably two things. In the early 90s, I spent a bunch of time volunteering with CJSW. And so getting used to kind of that whole kind of the world of audio and the world of, taking things from one medium to another, taking things from record or tape into the airwaves. And then also I've played in bands, so I was used to being around studios and recording stuff, and have dabbled a bunch myself in home recording. So I had kind of that knowledge behind me of how to take something from a cassette and how to put it into the computer.
CJSW is pretty important in the Calgary music community, being the only campus community station here, non-commercial. We're a platform for local artists. We will do live sessions with bands. They can come in and perform live on our airwaves. We also provide a platform for lots of other communities as well, not even just music.
More than that, it's the only real media outlet for average people, whether you're a UCalgary student or just a community member at large, to actually have media presence, exposure. It's a platform. Usually attract creative, community-minded individuals to volunteer and contribute here. And as you've seen in our library, one of the largest, if not the largest, kind of repository for local independent music that's been created over the last 40 or 50 years.
Thinking about favorite releases that I've found in our CJSW library, there are some ones that are fun and novel to me that are maybe more like kind of rare Canadian stuff. Like there's some Rick White, like Elevator kind of singles in there, and Eric's Trip. I think archiving in general is a very important thing in this world, sort of to be able to document like a certain area, like Calgary is an example here, going back a certain amount of time. Like I think it's just, if someone wasn't doing it, then so much would be lost. And Arif's work with the Calgary Cassette Preservation Society is very valuable. Actually, Arif in general is insanely valuable to the Calgary music community.
I think every city would be lucky to have someone like Arif doing what they do through Calgary Cassette Preservation Society.
His documentation and archival work with the Calgary Cassette Preservation Society, if he wasn't doing that, I think so much would be lost. So hugely important, and like there's things going back to the 80s, and things that I never would have discovered otherwise, but.
More to the point is like the fact that he does write-ups for every single posting he does, and speaking as an artist that is mentioned in that site, it's like I've admired that sort of repository. I've learned a lot. I know even when we've lost notable musicians in town, I will go to Calgary Cassette Preservation Society to find out who those people played with and kind of get maybe even pull the albums out. There's no monetary value in it. It's more now a cultural repository. Like fundamentally, the Glenbow should take over Arif's work when Arif's no longer here to do it, because the kind of work he's done is the stuff that no museum does anywhere, is that kind of cataloging.
I think as music gets released digitally, it creates really interesting, constraints on what you can archive and how you can get stuff. I think the best example is the MySpace era. So stuff was being released on MP3 or just streaming on MySpace, and that stuff's all gone now. That to me is actually a big concern for this preservation, because there are bands from that era which are now basically lost to time because their MySpace is gone. How I digitize my music and what that means is really taking something which is in an analog format, so something which is not you can't just put it in a computer and it'll play, and trying to get it into a computer in a way that it plays. And so effectively what that is that's taking it from either a cassette or a record or 8-track. I haven't done 8-tracks. I'm totally joking when I say 8 tracks, but taking it from a cassette or a record and playing it and basically in real time, recording that onto a computer, and then chopping that up, doing a little bit of chopping it into, so each song is its own track and all that stuff, and doing all the editing that you need to make it sound good. So for example, with records, it's producing all those clicks and pops that are really annoying but are kind of characteristic of vinyl. And for cassettes, sometimes it's just like cassettes can get really muddy sounding, so sometimes it's just a bit of EQ, so just a bit of adjusting the high, mid, low, whatever it is on that. It can be a really time intensive thing as well, just because it is real time. So you're basically putting a record on, you're kind of making the computer listen to the record, and then doing all the stuff afterwards. This is a pal of mine here in Calgary. Was selling a couple tapes, and so he mailed these to me. So normally what I do is I would have everything ready to go on the computer here. There we go. It's a punk rock cassette. I'm always kind of, when people ask me what I'm using, I'm a bit ashamed. I use very basic equipment, especially I find that, well, I guess it's two things. I find that the quality of especially analog to digital converters in modern computers is actually quite good. It's pretty reasonable. Getting people more interested and more active in archiving, I think, as part of why we've moved to nonprofit status with the Calgary Cassette Preservation Society, is because it's something which is bigger than just one person. It needs to be bigger than just me. And I think there are people out there who are very interested in this. And that's part of why the project's, I think, being so successful over its history, is that people care about this. And people have their own things that they want to contribute. But it's sometimes hard as an individual to say, well, what do I do with this? Where do I put this? Where somewhere it'll be found and it'll be remembered. And so kind of creating enough capacity to do that is important. So I think as we, for the CCPS, that's part of the mandate right now, is just to try to open that up, get more people active, make it a true kind of community thing, because ultimately it's supporting and reflecting the community.
As mentioned earlier, I do feel that the underground is something that will be completely invisible if there isn't any sort of documentation and showcasing. And what I love about Calgary Cassette Preservation Society is they actually, it's more than just an archive where you can see the history. It's actually interactive in the sense like, I'm curious to know what the Sturgeons sound like, or the El Caminos, or whatever.
The most influential or memorable bands in Calgary. This is an interesting one. I'm sure I could get into a lot of debates with people about this. I think there's a lot of stuff that happened in the early 80s that I think was really foundational for a lot, or late 70s, early 80s. It was really foundational for a lot of that stuff. I'm going to cherry pick a few names that I think were really, really massively important. Beyond Possession were a great skate rock band. They put out a full-length record on Metal Blade Records, which is a big metal label that's still in existence. There's guys like Al Charlton and Tom Bagley who've been playing in bands forever. Mark Eggleston, I should lump him in there as well, who've been playing in bands like Riot 303, the Sturgeons, the Von Zippers, Forbidden Dimension, all these great kind of more garage rock leaning bands. On the punk side of things, in the 90s was interesting because there was a lot of it was the alt rock era, and so things kind of took a different turn. But you get bands like Wagbeard, Hot Little Rocket, the Primrods, who are one of my absolute favorites because they were weirdo and kind of art rocky. There's stuff like that happens. Cordavita is another great band. Just all this, it's so hard for me to put it down on just a couple of bands, but that's part of it. Calgary's an interesting place. I think Calgary has its own, not its own maybe unique styles and stuff, but we're a weird geographic location that's very different from, say, Toronto or Vancouver. These centers that are bigger and that are tied to other places. It's really hard to get to Calgary. It's really hard to get out of Calgary if you're a traveling band. And so there's been a lot of people who've just stayed here and created this art, and that's really fantastic. And for me, also I'm part of the community, and I'm part of that music community, and I think it's a great way to support that and to keep that all going.